I hope you'll all bear with me. Before I get to my remarks regarding Rosh Hashana, I really think this is a very appropriate time to thank and recognize a number of people who we as a shul should be very grateful to. Um, my guess is that if you've opened this video, you've done what I normally do when I decide whether or not to open a video, which is I first glance at the amount of time it is. And my guess is you saw the time and you were somewhat intimidated. So I've got good news and bad news. The bad news is that it's not a typo. That is the time. The good news is at least I'm not telling you some long Dvar Torah. First of all, I have to start on behalf of the entire shul with giving a tremendous thank you to Yael Ginsburg. Yael assumed the presidency at an extremely, I don't even want to say difficult, bizarre time for all of us, and certainly for the shul. Yael has absolutely thrown himself at so many issues and problems and logistical matters, and he's done it all with dignity and grace and such an optimistic outlook. I've been inspired in my time working with him. Yael, if I may, I want to give you what humbly I think is probably a very good compliment in your book. Obviously, I never had the opportunity to work with him in his leadership of the shul, but from everything I've heard, it sounds like in many ways you're following in the footsteps of your father, Zichrono Livracha, which I know to you is not a small compliment. And thank you. Thank you so much for everything. I want to thank Seth and Menashe Katz. I think I have a decent idea of everything they're doing, but I'm sure I don't fully grasp it. But I assure you, with all due respect, the vast majority of you, even if you come to Minyanim, even if you schmooze to them about your seats or your minyan assignment, don't have a clue how much time they're putting in, particularly for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And thank you so much to both of you. Jules Meisler has worked on the seating plan for Minyanim in our shul, I believe, for decades, for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. We threw him the greatest of change-ups this year. It might be less seats, but it's far more complicated. Most things that volunteers for the shul do, I think I can figure out how they did it. Maybe I assume they're better at it than I am. Maybe I don't think I have the time or energy. We're so appreciative. I don't have the foggiest idea how Jules Meisler did what he did, but I'm extremely appreciative. Josh Breitstein, we have the basic layout. We God willing are holding minyanim in 4 different locations. 2 of them tents that we have to set up. I mean, the company sets up the physical tent, but set it up to look for a minyan. We as a shul have to do that. That's Josh's department. Even the areas that we've been using as minyanim need to be restructured in different ways. Josh, you've done a remarkable job, and thank you so much. Simi Franco, somehow, some way, it doesn't matter what time, it doesn't matter where you physically are, whatever the shul needs, you just juggle it all with constant kindness and grace, and thank you so much. Sammy, I know Yael quite appropriately thanked you in his Shomer letter. I just want to reiterate that what a president is supposed to do after his term ends, especially a president whose term ended with the first phase of Corona, he's supposed to hand over the keys and head for the door. And you've been involved in so many ways. Yasher koach to you. There are so many other volunteers who have done so much. I don't mean this as a complete list, but people who have been involved in more than one thing in this brief period, I feel like I really need to mention. Judd Lifshitz, what you did, thank you for organizing that lovely Kumsitz this week. It was very special, but what you did with the digital recordings has been such a remarkable chesed to so many in our shul and beyond. Those not familiar with what I'm referring to, go to yomtivnusach.com. It's wonderfully, wonderfully done, and thank you so much, Judd. Debbie Katz, Debbie Katz is involved in so many things for the show right now, whether it be matters involving the youth committee, whether it be the Yizkor book that Debbie and Mark have worked on together yet again this year. Thank you. Whether it be things with the Sagan House. Uh, Thank you so much for everything you're doing. Ori Carmel and his work with the finance committee and his work for the Kumsitz. You've been involved in so many things. Thank you to each and every one of you. Again, reiterate, there are many volunteers on many of these and other projects that, forgive me for not mentioning, I just can't mention everyone, but I'm highlighting people who have been involved in more than one thing in the last few weeks, to the best of my knowledge. I want to mention one more very special thank you. Those of you who received the envelope from the shul received a shomer, received a Yizkor book, received a lovely honey, a container of honey with something to distribute the honey, and you received a Simanim card. I want to tell you who worked on the Simanim card. Eli Lazar worked on the Simanim card. For those of you who don't know who Eli is a teenager in our shul who's, by the way, been a regular attendee of our minyanim, and it's always a pleasure to see him. But the fact that a young man decided to volunteer to do this for the shul to create an even nicer sense of connectivity between us, and particularly for those who can't be with us in shul, is beautiful. It is no surprise that he's the son of Carol and Tovia Lazar, who have been involved in so many things in the show. My impression is Carol was also involved in that card. Carol Danit Kanel involved with this, with so many other projects. But Eli, a big, big yasher koach to you. And I want to mention one more thing, and that is every single person involved with the conduct of the minyanim of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. We owe each and every one of you such a thank you, whether it be a Baal Koreh, whether it be a Baal Tokea, whether it be a Chazan, whether it be a Gabbai. Each of you are either someone who could do this in your sleep, but we're asking you to do it in such a different way this year, who probably rankles you terribly, or you're a person who really doesn't normally do this for the shul, at least not for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and you're stepping up because you're needed, because we have all these different minyanim. And thank you to each and every one of you. Forgive me for taking everyone's time with this, but I think it's very, very important. And my tefillah that each and every one of you and your families and all those close to you should merit a ksiv v'chasima tova, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu should bless you, and you should have a portion of the merit of all the tefillos over Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and all the different ways. Thank God the shul has been able to service people even in these difficult times. You all should have a very significant share of that schar, of that reward, in Hashem's judgment of you for the year to come. And kol hakavod, and thank you so much. Unfortunately, I'm not done. So, I've noticed something very striking over the last few weeks. I've had actually a relatively significant amount of people who have wanted to talk to me about a great emotional challenge leading into Rosh Hashanah this year. And this is not a COVID topic, at least not directly. Maybe some of them it's indirectly connected, I don't know. But a number of people, and to the best of my knowledge, I more than in any other year, to my recollection, a number of people have wanted to talk about the fact that they feel their relationship with God right now is complicated and is difficult. And they feel that it's very difficult to come into Rosh Hashanah this year. And I've been very struck by the number of people who have shared that. I don't know if you hear the phone ringing. I assume it's not a person talking about this problem. I don't mean any disrespect by talking about this topic. I actually was very struck by how many of you feel this way for one way or another, from different demographic groups, very different situations. And my assumption in general in the show is when one person talks to me, statistically speaking, there's a number of people who have similar feelings and they're just not coming forward. So I want to talk about that a little bit this year. My assumption is, as I said, there are other people emotionally struggling with their relationship with God right now. Things are not going the way in their lives that they would hope. They don't necessarily feel at this moment in their life that God is their benevolent Father. My assumption is there are many people, even if they don't feel that way exactly, they feel that they're in somewhat of a rut right now. Things are so difficult in general, and the idea of whipping oneself into shape for a meaningful Rosh Hashana sounds a little bit far-fetched probably to many of us. And my guess and assumption is there are many people who are watching who are raring to go for Rosh Hashanah, understanding that shul might be different this year, or in their own private homes, whatever, and they're going to make it work, and they're excited about the opportunity. And my hope is that even those people perhaps will gain even a broader perspective, perhaps, from these thoughts. So I'd like to share with you what I've said to many of the people who have discussed this with me, and some further thoughts that I've had. Sort of the ideas have been germinating in my mind. So some of this might be a rerun for some of you who have actually spoken to me, and my guess is that a lot of it won't be a rerun. So the first thing that I've mentioned to people is, to the extent that a person feels this way, this is the ideal holiday to be thinking about this subject. Because Rosh Hashanah, more than any other day on the Jewish year, has to do with our relationship with God. Yom Kippur is hopefully about God forgiving us, and we spend so much time on Yom Kippur apologizing for different sins. Rosh Hashanah, of course, we're not apologizing for sins on Rosh Hashanah. The general theme of the tefillos of Rosh Hashanah is the fact that God is our Melech, God is our King, and devoting ourselves in service to Him, which means, at its core, Rosh Hashanah is about our relationship with Him. So if someone feels that their relationship with God is somewhat stilted at the moment, or stuck, this is the ideal day on the Jewish year to reflect on it, to think about it, to hopefully change it. And of course, the other Yom Tovim on the calendar, we're very grateful to God, but it's about events. It's about what God did for us in those days, and so it's similar in these days. Rosh Hashanah is just about us and God. We recognize the fact that God created humanity, Adam and Chava, on Rosh Hashanah, which, by the way, is another thing to think about, that Rosh Hashanah is this capacity to recreate ourselves, to rejuvenate ourselves. This is the date that Adam and Chava were created to begin with. This is the date that we can develop ourselves in a different way. So this is the time. Point number one. Point number two, something that we reference so much on Rosh Hashanah is Akedas Yitzchak. Let's think about Akedas Yitzchak. Now, normally when people reflect on Akedas Yitzchak, on Avram's willingness to sacrifice his own son, Yitzchak, I think the focus for many of us is, wow, how difficult it must have been to be ready to kill his own child. How can you even imagine that? But I'd like to slightly shift the picture a little bit. From Avram's perspective, forget the difficulty of killing his own child. How could anyone forget the difficulty? But I'm saying, put that aside for one moment. This makes no sense. From the perspective of human intellect, this instruction makes no sense. God gave him this charge to go on a journey. God promises him great things. God tells him a nation will come from him. He does it. He has great things occur to him. He has this remarkable miracle that at the age of 100 and his wife is 90, they have a child. This is the child of miracles. And those who Avram has inspired in his spread of the belief of monotheism, take one look at this family, Avram and Sarah and Yitzchak, and how could you not believe in God? Look at that miracle. And now God comes to Avraham and tells him, kill him. Kill him? He's supposed to be the nation. This is what you told me. Kivi Yitzchak yikarei l'chazara. The offspring will come through Yitzchak. That will be your true nation. What's the plan? You made this grand promise to me. Was it all a joke? Was it all a trick? This doesn't make any sense, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And yet he was ready to do it. He was ready to do it. The point that so many people have raised to me in one way or another over the past weeks is, how could God be doing this? How could God be allowing X to be happening in my life, be allowing Y to be happening in my life? Why should this be? And I certainly don't have a good answer, and nobody does. But it is something worth reflecting on, that we focus so much on Akedas Yitzchak on this holiday. And think of what Avram Avinu did. Think of what Avram Avinu was willing to do, and think of the context in which he was willing to do it. And they had koach. Rav Chaim of Volozhin says that when the patriarchs and the matriarchs tap in to remarkable spiritual strength and energy, they imbue that with all subsequent they imbue that into all subsequent generations of Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people. So it can be done. We have the ability to do it, though it's hard. It's very hard. And finally, and this is what I'd really like to reflect on, I referenced earlier the idea that Rosh Hashana is very much about our recognizing that God is our Melech, that God is our King. What does that mean? What's the point of that? What does that mean, that he's our King? So let's try to break that down a little bit. So first of all, part of it is that he's our King, and he's not our democratically elected ruler or leader. It's a big difference. A king, I have to listen to whatever he says. And, and of course, both in Jewish law, and my guess is in many other societies as well, if one disobeys the king, one could even be killed. So I have to obey whatever the king tells me. In a democracy such as the wonderful democracy in which we live, if I don't like a law, if I don't like a policy, I can lobby, I can perhaps vote the official out of office. There are ways to deal with it. A king, this is the rule. So we say that God is our King, and that presumably means that we devote ourselves to do whatever he says. As opposed to what? What? When I'm not thinking of him as a king, when I'm just thinking of him, we change the Shemona Esrei. The one thing, at least for Ashkenazim, there's one mistake, if we make the Shemona Esrei, that if we made the mistake, we have to read the whole Shemona Esrei if we moved on from it. We go from calling God a Kel HaKadosh, a holy God, to a Melech HaKadosh, a holy king. If we said a Kel HaKadosh, a holy God, we missed the boat for this time of year. Starting from Rosh Hashana through Yom Kippur, we have to say Shemona Esrei over. What's the difference? God gives instructions, a king gives instructions. What's the difference? So the king is the point, that even if I don't understand it, I'm willing to do it. So is the point chukim? Is that the gist of Rosh Hashanah? That we should tell ourselves, if there's any laws that we don't understand, we'll do it anyway? I don't think that's the point. How many chukim are you struggling with right now? There are certain things that maybe we don't understand, so when we study it, there are certain aspects of our day-to-day practice that maybe we don't get why it is that way. Most of us are probably not having this existential issue with with the halachas of paraduma, the red heifer. I mean, that's the classic chok in the Torah. There are other chukim that are more relevant in our day-to-day lives, but I don't see most of us grappling with those on a day-to-day level. Can't imagine that Rosh Hashanah is about a better perspective towards certain aspects of the laws of kosher. I think we're bigger than that and broader than that here. So I'll tell you what I think it means that God is our melech. You know something? When we're citizens in a kingdom, our role is to follow the instructions of the king, regardless of what he does. He might charge us more taxes. He might charge us less taxes. He might reward us. He might punish us. If you want to live in that kingdom, if the king says jump, you ask how high. Let's think about that. What that means is that I want to devote myself to keeping God's way of life that he lays out for me in his Torah. And I want to devote myself to that regardless of what he is or isn't doing for me right now. I mean, of course, I have everything I have from him. But regardless if I feel like I'm getting my fair share or not, regardless of if I feel like God is giving me an easier hand or a harder hand, he's my king. My role is not to assess what he is doing for me. My role is to assess if I'm keeping my instructions appropriately. I think that's a very powerful point. And if we really reflect on that, I think that fits in with a lot of the challenges that people are having. And this is easier said than done. And I don't mean this is a light thing to work on at all. I think it's terribly challenging. But I think it's something to think about. Let's take it one step further. Assuming that this is what it means to relate to God as my king. By the way, just as an aside, I've shared with you in past weeks, I'm learning to kneel with my Wednesday morning class. I'm finding it very interesting. To be honest with you, I haven't learned to kneel, certainly not in depth. Earlier, this is my first time. I'm finding it fascinating. So in Daniel, we have the story of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, the famous individuals who, because they wouldn't bow down to the idol of Nebuchadnezzar has them thrown into the fire. And Nebuchadnezzar threatens them, and doesn't threaten them, he tells them, if you don't bow down, I will throw you in the fire. And they say to him, our God can save us from the fire. Our God can save us from the fire, and our God can save us from you. And then they say to him, and even if for whatever reason he doesn't save us from the fire, we're still not going to bow down to the idol. That's this point exactly. God can do so many things, but that's not why I'm serving him. I'm serving him because that's my role in life. How do we motivate ourselves to lead life that way? So I'll tell you what very lofty people talk about and think about. And to be candid with you, I'm not sure I personally am there. I'm sure we have a very special group of people in our shul. I'm sure many of you are there. My assumption is that a significant portion of people are not there. It's just this general love of God. This general love of God that a person is so appreciative to God and so thankful for everything God has done for them that they just want to do what God wants from them in this world. And again, applying it to the model of monarchy that we discussed a few moments ago, whether or not he rewards me, I want to do it because that's what he wants from me, and I'm so grateful. Ahavas Hashem. It's a lofty level. I want to talk about an idea that I think is similar. I would say it's one step down. And I don't think it's easy, but I think it's something that maybe some of the simpler among us, including myself, can relate to a little bit better. question, do we believe in Torah and mitzvos? Do we believe in it? Do we believe that this is the way to lead our lives? My guess is that the vast, vast majority of us do. Perhaps we've had moments of inspiration. Perhaps it's been imbued in us from a young age. Perhaps we found it in adulthood. Whatever it is, but the bottom line is we believe in it. In a sense, what it is to accept God as my king is to take a step back and say, I want to live to a lofty plane of intellectual, spiritual honesty. And that is, I fundamentally appreciate and understand that everything that God asks of me in His Torah is the way to lead my life. Some of the things I understand better, some of the things I don't understand as well. But I buy into the program. And if I buy into that program, and if I've had moments of connection, and if I've had moments of aha moments, then that means that if I'm going to be true to myself and honest to myself, I need to recognize that this is the life to lead. Not because I'm afraid if I don't do it, who knows what hell will be waiting for me. Though that's a powerful deterrent. Not because I believe if I do it, God will give me all kinds of wonderful things in the year to come. That's a powerful incentive. And if these things work for people, that's great. But there's another level. And that other level is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, whatever it is that you want from me, I want to lead my life in that manner. Because I know it's true. And I know it's right. And I want to be a great person. And I know the way I am a great person, not great that people will think I'm great. Great that I know I'm rising to the occasion. And you, God, know I'm rising to the occasion. And the holy soul that you imbued upon me is being nourished by my life, by my choices. And that's also what it could mean to accept God as our Melech. And if you think about it, if a person can bring themselves to that point, and it's not an easy point, I can't emphasize enough, I don't mean that it's easy. But if a person can bring themselves to that point, then it doesn't matter if God is doing for us in the moment what we want Him to do, what we don't want Him to do. It's just part of the challenge. It's just part of the road ahead of us, maybe even an obstacle course ahead of us. And maybe that's something to reflect on Rosh Hashana. And maybe, if we think that way, we're channeling in a small, small way the remarkable power and force and ability of Avram Avinu. And if we focus ourselves in that way, then we really are recreating ourselves. We're really tapping into the unique abilities and powers of this sacred day of Hayom Haras Olam, the day on which the world, which really mean mankind, was created. We should all merit a ksiva v'chasima tova. God should write and seal us for a good year to come. Hashem should bring us so many brachos, because every bracha that He brings us will help us more in the ultimate bracha. And the ultimate bracha is the opportunity, the ultimate blessing is the opportunity to continue to grow and continue to strive as servants of God. Ksiva v'chasima tova.